You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
The world's gone to the devil in the dive bomber, and you're diving with it. You gotta change your direction. You gotta zoom up again. The Lord knows your hidden sins, and that's any kind of sin, brother. What did the great prophet Isaiah say? Look ye blind that ye may see. You gotta make the Lord your seeing eye, just as he is mine.
One of the most challenging mysteries ever to thrill you. Different, because you know who the murderess is. You see her commit the crime. You see an innocent man condemned to pay for that crime. The only solution of which is locked in the shocked mind of his own child. The only eyewitness.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
I'm going to be honest, it's totally slipped my mind what's coming next week, but rest assured it's going to be another lonely guy falling into the life of crime, because that's what we're doing this month. So join that sleaze, please.
That's very true. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 5 or 6 years or whatever, like 140, 150 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which there is like 50 of now, where we talk about new release genre films. So if you're interested in that at all, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we did have quite a few people make the jump this week, so we'll give them their shout outs here. I got to expand this so I can see their full names though. We had Emiliano Biaz, we had Timothy McManus, we had Kevin Bristow sign up for $10 a month and is joining us for the monthly virtual screenings, which we try to do for the last Thursday of every month. We had Anthony Harris sign up, Dane Allen, Adam Fours, Anthony Corelli, Alex 12, Living Person 1, Casey White, New Metal Jacket, who signed up for an entire year of the show, because if anyone's interested in that, you can get a little bit of a discounted monthly rate if you do a whole year in advance.
That's a great name.
We had Joe Morris sign up. That is a great name. We had Josh Carlton sign up. We had Nico Shine upgrade from $5 a month to $10 a month, also joining us for the virtual screening. We had Andrew Foster, Daniel Wolf, Deg, Bryce Olson, Janos Kimming, Haymu, Robert Martin. This is also, you can tell these are the Spooktober numbers. Everyone was in the spooky season.
Yes.
Mike D, Teddy Stockhart, Clayton Ambrose, Martin Behrens, Catherine Woods, Abby, G. Haslam, Michael Newberger, John Feely, Sam Wiener, Abby Holman, Rick Tracy, Calvin Vaughn, Stephen Tokarski, and last but not least, James Baker. Actually, Stephen and James Baker also both signed up for an entire year of the show. So awesome. Thanks so much to everyone there. Hope you're enjoying all of those bonus episodes. We appreciate that a lot.
Yes, thank you.
That's our one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, and I see the stats, I can see you listening right now on both those platforms. Give us a good old rating and review down at the bottom. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the very last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you freaks have thought of a lot of things. We've had people buy notebooks. We've had people buy pillows, hoodies, just posters for their place. The link to that is in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have been doing the last main feed episode of Spooktober. We had a good friend of the pod, Mr. Halloween Mindset himself, Rob Franco, on the show to really get into the spooky mindset with a double feature of some anthology horror films. We talked about George Romero and Stephen King's very colorfully exaggerated and comically mean-spirited EC Comics throwback, very gruesome, very zany, called Creepshow from 1982. Perhaps you've heard of this one. We had a lot of time talking about some horror legends and also some sitcom comedy legends, just getting absolutely torn apart in Tom Savini gore effects and lots of bright colors.
Yeah, and watching Stephen King go full Simple Jack mode, which is a lot of fun.
He did. He was on so much cocaine in that era.
Oh yeah.
And, he's like, dude, what if I was a plant and I shot myself in the head with a shotgun? So we talked about that, as well as Mario Bava's very meticulously stylized and more sort of like decadent Gothic Italian horror anthology film called Black Sabbath from 1963, which is, in my opinion, one of the best anthology horror films. It has like a stalker thriller sort of like phone call sequence in it that is like evocative of Scream. It had in 1963, mind you.
Yeah.
And it also does a Boris Karloff like Serbian vampire epic right in the middle, and then it does a sequence that is basically straight out of an Argento film, basically like a full decade before Argento would even start making those kinds of like abstract, really, really crazy horror sequences.
Yeah, and truly one of the scariest prosthetics I've ever seen. That dead face on the old woman is terrifying as it's just floating towards you. Oh my God.
That's right. So you haven't heard that episode. That was over on the main feed 2 weeks ago. Go back and check it out. But last week, over on the Patreon feed exclusively, we had episode 300, and it was the Halloween episode. We really wanted to wrap things up with a huge show, Blind Spot, a movie that we had been dancing around talking about for many, many years at this point. We talked about Wishmaster from 1997.
Yes, our favorite film.
Directed by Robert Kurtzman. But no, we also paired that with A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. Obviously, Wes Craven's very visually surreal, psychologically tormented, supernatural teen slasher. So we were like, that feels like something that we kind of owe like an actual full episode on, and we went long on it. So, you know, a lot of people were telling us they were happy with that.
I think we went longer than the film itself. So
we did.
Nailed it.
We did. We love Wes Craven on this show, but we also went, look, if we're going to talk about a huge A picture like that, we got to go full trash monster mode. And so that was why we also talked about Wishmaster, which was just so goofy and so ridiculous and honestly
So
pretty
much fun.
idiotic. But, you know,
very stupid.
An absolute blast to watch a 80s VFX gore legend just kind of construct a bunch of sequences worked backwards from getting to some ridiculous images and disgusting images.
Yeah. Unbelievable good fun. What's the lead's name again? Do you remember?
Andrew Divoff.
Yes, he's giving a hell of a performance. Totally committed, hamming it up every scene. Just
Some of the most
worst
baritone
dialogue.
chewing you've ever seen. Stands toe to toe with Tony Todd for like 2 minutes, and you know, it's
literally
not,
they
that's
have a
not
voice
nothing.
off. It's pretty funny. So yeah, would recommend for something stupid, and then obviously Nightmare is just a classic. So
Yeah, most people know Freddy. Not a lot of people know the genie from Wishmaster in the
djinn.
same way.
It's a gin. Sorry to interrupt. I know I'm not.
Oh wow,
That's right.
Wow, that's true.
Get it right.
This ain't no. I do like the line where he's like, "This ain't no Robin Williams." You know, like what are we talking about here?
What a line.
Yep. But yeah, so again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was over on the bonus feed last week. But moving on to this week, obviously, we are doing a full 180. This is the October 31st to November 1st transition from Spooktober into Noirvember. And to get us into that zone of depressing, sweaty men in fedoras and smoking and killing people, we have none other than a very special returning guest, someone who's been on the show many times before. Many of you will know her. She is the one of the hosts of Seeking Derangements. She is also the co-host of the newly minted Movie Mindset podcast with friend of the pod Will Menaker. That guest is Hesse Denny. Hesse, how you doing?
Hey, Josh. Hey, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming back.
I always
it's
now
truly an
associate
honor.
you with I always blank on the movies. It's just that always happens on this show. But when you've showed us possibly the grossest tank.
Tank squishing.
Yes,
the skin.
squishing. We'll say that. Yeah, that I've ever seen in my life, and I think about it all the time. So I just wanted to say that starting off.
Haunts our dreams.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I feel like I've had such good luck with bringing movies on that I was really racking my brain to think what should I bring on this time. And I kind of gave up with the second one a little bit, but I picked something fun, and I think the first one is something that's a really special one, actually.
Well, I could tell right away because I was like, Hesse, we got to have you back on. And I know that of a lot of the people that I follow, you actually have seen quite a bit of like I was looking up sort of some of the old crime movies that you had logged, and I was like, wow, she's actually seen some stuff. I don't even know what the fuck this is. So I was like, give us some options here. But it was also fun getting sort of like a front row seat to Hesse trying to figure it out too. She was like, I want to do this one, but she was like, here's all these pairings. She was like, Naked Kiss. I was like, great movie, already done it. She's like, Nightmare Alley. And then she was like, well, it's not actually noir enough, actually. She's getting nerdy on me about it too. So
I wanted something that would pair well, a nice, a shocking kind of a little bit of a shocker, but more conventional, like, a lot of these movies take place during the day, which is interesting for noir movies, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But Hesse, what noirs did you end up landing on, and why did you pair them together?
I landed on The Sound of Fury, aka Try and Catch Me, which, two bad names for different reasons. But I paired that one with Shadow on the Wall, which is a fun one.
Both titles are kind of hilariously literal when I finally watched the film. I was like, oh yeah, one of them is actually about a sound of fury that builds, and everyone literally, the characters in the film remark upon it out loud in dialogue. Yeah. And then with the second one...
sound sure is furious.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then Shadow on the Wall, it's like, the whole movie, I was like, oh, there's the shadow on the wall. There it is again,
I decided eventually on Shadow on the Wall because the jump scare of throat goat Nancy Reagan as the nurse is very fun.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk about it. This will be our first time talking about Nancy Reagan on the show. And I was quite shocked when I actually looked up that credit. And I was like, because she's not credited as that. She's credited as Nancy Davis.
Yeah.
That's right. So, but then, I looked her up. I was like, I kind of looked her up because I was like, she's not bad. Of the actors in the movie.
I was very shocked to find out she was the first lady. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I also think that there's something, obviously we're going Turner classic 1950s mode a little bit. There's going to be some, things that are recurring that we see in a lot of these movies. But I also thought it was interesting that both of these kind of involved like guilt-ridden torment over specifically like an inadvertent murder and like a questionable kind of like justice system process around it. The first one, Sound of Fury, is more like mob violence, sort of like crime media sort of like message picture. And the second one is more pulpy child endangerment, kind of like B thriller kind of stuff. But honestly, we are
psychology is involved, all these quack psychological things.
Yeah, it was like a Shadow of the Doubt a little bit.
Yeah,
Shadow of a Doubt.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
but that's kind of why I wanted to pair them up. Just the guilt and the sweat, the amount of sweat compared between The Sound of Fury. There's so much sweat compared to Anne Southern in Shadow of a Doubt, who's totally pristine the whole movie, no sweat whatsoever.
Frank Lovejoy. I wanted to like reach out and like get mop it a little bit. I was like, dude, you gotta relax a little bit, man. I'm so sorry. But yeah, so we're jumping in noir mode. We're kind of going with some underseen noirs right off the start here, and I hadn't seen either of them, and I like them both. So I'm very excited to jump into it here. Let's kick things off. Let's start with The Sound of Fury.
Got any idea what time it's getting to be?
5:30. What? Going somewhere?
Well, I gotta get home. Jerry, about that job you mentioned. My wife doesn't know where I am.
Keep her guessing. They'll respect you more that way. Hey, you like this one?
Oh, yeah, that's good. Jerry...
Buddy of mine, give it to me. I liked it. He took it right off his neck. I'll have to introduce you to him sometime. He's quite a character.
All right, we are talking about The Sound of Fury, a.k.a. Try and Catch Me and also Try and Get Me. with a big exclamation point on there as well, which is the title that I actually got on my copy. It is a 1950 crime thriller film noir directed by one Cy Endfield, or just known as Cy Endfield. It is written by a man named Joe Pagano, based on his own 1947 novel called The Condemned. And it stars Frank Lovejoy, Kathleen Ryan, and Richard Carlson.
And Lloyd Bridges.
And Lloyd Bridges, of course. Got to throw
Yes.
the Lloyd in there. I always go by kind of just like the top billing, but Lloyd makes more of an impression than some of the people they have billed higher than him. That's for sure.
Oh, Lloyd is my favorite actor in this movie. He gives it the pedals to the metal with Lloyd, especially towards the end when he's kind of like trapped like a rat, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah, though this has kind of a bit of a claustrophobic structure to it, based on the fact that Pagano's material was inspired by a very vicious and publicized lynch mob in San Jose, California, that took place I saw some conflicting reports. It was like 1933, 1935. Mid-30s, where two confessed kidnappers of basically the eldest son and heir of a fairly well-liked and wealthy sort of department store owner for ransom ended up basically murdering him by bashing in his head with like a concrete block and like throwing him over a bridge into one of the local bays. And shortly after, the real men were arrested and their confessions were kind of publicized, which there were a couple sort of ambiguous holes in, because it's, 1930s cops, not the best at their job. I mean, you could argue, still not, but like, I did very much doubt even then, especially. And as a result, it kind of sparked this like local lynch mob of essentially thousands in the San Jose area, which is the scariest thing. A bunch of local San Joseans just marching after me is terrifying.
I think it's like upwards of 10,000 they estimated, which is just it's terrifying.
It's an absurd number, and everyone was in on it. They took like photographs of it where they blurred the faces out so no one would get in trouble. No one was ever convicted for it, and they basically did a full jail assault riot, including like radio broadcasters and local students, and even some politicians were or at least one governor promised to basically pardon anyone who got involved with it ahead of it happening. So it's like an insane,
essentially.
Yeah, it's an insane true story, and capped off by the fact that, and what Pagano seemed to have run with in terms of adapting it, was that there was supposedly one of the men, as they were being dragged out to get lynched, screamed, "You're making a huge mistake. I'm not the man you want." While basically another guy's body just like, swayed in the background, essentially. So this is kind of the image that Pagano has, decided that he was going to try and get to when he was making this. And the director that he attracted was this guy named Cy Endfield, who was this Jewish communist theater actor at Yale, who was part of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater. And also, he actually has a surprisingly long, someone really went and did the work on his Wikipedia page talking about his whole foray into like magic and like sleight of hand illusionist type shit.
It's very curious. I really love the Wikipedia page section where he's talking about where he went in front of HUAC and he refused to name names, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not a communist anymore, but I just didn't want to name any names, It's like a shitty thing to do."
There's no rat.
Yeah. He's like, "I ain't no rat."
Yeah. And he essentially found his way into movie making in the 1940s. It sounds like by using part of his Wells and RKO connection, because he did some work on The Magnificent Ambersons. And he really hit it with a noir film called The Underworld Story, which was successful enough to get him a follow-up and actually a slightly above B-movie budget for this film. And he really did like this idea of this kind of nasty script, which was about this decent American family man being corrupted into aligning himself essentially with the psychopath character in Lloyd Bridges. And apparently everyone that he showed both the script and the movie to, eventually, like friends, like Joseph Cotton was someone he was friends with due to the Wells connection, and everyone was like, "Dude, this is such an anti-American thing that you're making in the midst of the Korean War and the Cold War fear and patriotism." And then I was like, well, this is just Hesse's thing. Because, Jamie already brought up The Skin, and I remember us talking about The Skin specifically, the aspect of it was that we were watching shitty copies of it because it's still never screened in like America because of how ridiculously anti-American it is in terms of depicting the Allied liberators in Italy as just as degrading, both sexually basically, and in terms of, you know, violence as well. So it was just like, you know, this is
never seeing the light of day.
It's a Hesse trademark. It's the evil of America and the American middle class and such. And I love that his own kind of corruption and, you know, evil turn of being like a good, upstanding family man. It kind of mirrors the turn of the good, upstanding town. Like, just going like bloodthirsty, like animal mode, and just like, you know, just killing him in the end.
Yeah. No, I found this like quite unsettling because like a lot of it is it's a fairly socially conscious kind of like noir, like and it's not something you haven't seen before. Like there is like, you know, that post-war financial kind of desperation aspect to it. There is a little bit of like a guy who's down on his luck, you know, has to get into a life of crime, and you know what, crime doesn't pay, man. You know, like there's that aspect of it. And what's crazy to me is that how it makes the transition from that movie into the other movie when it does become this more thing about like the American collective psyche that is prone to, you know, getting hysterical and getting violent, and how it mixes Frank Lovejoy's very guilt-ridden performance with like this very hot-headed anarchy that sort of like starts to form around him, and kind of predicts a movie we've covered on this show. Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole was something I thought about.
Yes.
In terms of how they build an entire carnival around like this very, you know, this survival situation gone wrong, and people are just, you know, trying to turn it into like this entertainment product that's weaponizing people's, you know, fears and stuff like that. And so like that aspect kind of makes its way into the finale. And obviously there's a mob violence aspect to it as well, which reminded us of the big mob violence film we've talked about on this show, William Wellman's The Oxbow Incident.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a dark one.
Yeah, which is one of the most harrowing films I think we've maybe talked about on the show, because it's just 70 real-time minutes of watching people consider lynching people they don't know are guilty, and that there is, and the whole movie is like, yeah, there's actually quite a bit of doubt here, and doubt just keeps forming, but like the wheels are turning towards, they've already just decided what they want to do, and they're going to do it.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that end game a little bit like the entire time, so that just kind of, it overlooms the whole film. This is interesting in that you're at first thinking it's just about him getting caught, essentially, and then it just becomes so much more devastating by the end. Yeah,
early on, I was like, this is just more like a Joseph H. Lewis, like kind of just like, you know, it's a noir with like left-wing ideas. It's just, you know, it's about, here's a, you know, like it reminded me of Terror in a Texas Tower as Sterling Hayden, where he's just he's a Swedish immigrant who just like kills a capitalist gunslinger. It's like using classic noir sort of images and kind of tropes and popular crime entertainment things, but sneaking in these kind of, you know, sort of like ideas, and maybe even not so subtle ideas.
Vito just outright saying them like two
Vito
or three
literally
times.
just stating them completely.
Yeah,
what a hilarious character. But honestly, I felt the same. I felt the same way watching some of the Joseph H. Lewis ones as well. Sure. A lot of those guys who were, you know, you have to give them a little bit of credit, I guess, that, you know, they were making these films during the McCarthy era anti-communist witch hunts, and they were just being like, what if I put like communist ideas into the mouth of Sterling Hayden? You know,
right?
Like,
It's really insane.
Maybe people will finally connect with them.
Yeah,
I think that's also a reason they might spell them out too, the way that they do. Just really, as a better understanding, a better grasp of something that people were so, you know, angry about, I guess. Or scared of, rather. Yeah. No, but this was very, very good, and I was happy to read there was a huge Jonathan Rosenbaum piece on this director that I ended up reading, because he was a huge fan, and he actually thought that this was one of the like most masterful American films that is like not on any like best American film list, like on the AFI list. I think that was what it was. He called it like the best American film not on the AFI list. And he called Cy Endfield, I think accurately, a social environmentalist
in the sense that his movies were interested in kind of like group behavior and breakdown of social fabric and thus a sort of psychological fabric of America.
Vito says a line towards the end that I think really sums it up. He says, like, violence is a symptom of moral and social breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, like, it sums up his whole, the whole, philosophy of this movie and of a lot of Cy Endfield's other movies, too.
Yeah, this idea that, if someone is becoming a criminal, there must be, it's possibly there's something defective in their environment, not necessarily in their psychology. And that seems to be kind of like the idea that, they wanted to run with. They wanted to run with this idea of there was a guy who was lynched for, committing this really brutal crime. But like, what would make a guy go along with a crime like that? And so they come up with like, here's kind of like how this guy falls into this, and it opens on like this very sort of atmospheric scene, this like busy crowded street, a lot of like chaotic hustle and bustle running past, and everyone's running past and ignoring this like preacher character. And the preacher character kind of sets the stage too, where he's like, you got to look in your heart and ask yourself how much of like each of you is guilty for all the evil in the world, and like, why do you do the things that you do? And that seems to be where Pagano as a writer has been decided to kind of come from, is like, how did a guy end up doing something like this? Which is when we pick up with this very average, down on his luck kind of working class, unemployed American dude named Howard Tyler, played by Frank Lovejoy, who was also in Ida Lupino's great film The Hitchhiker, which we've covered on this show, as one of the guys who picks up the hitchhiker and ends up held at gunpoint for a few days, like transiting that guy around.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, he's got the same kind of nervous performance. That
same
he gives
sweaty,
just very anxious.
Forehead.
Trying to find out what to do next, really.
Yeah, it's just so scared and tormented, and kind of like freaking out. But I liked too that in this, because so much of that film was also kind of like about male ego and sort of social economic power, and obviously this guy just pointing a gun at you and being able to humiliate you and threaten you with death at any moment. And in this one, he's playing the guy who's hitchhiking around, and he's hitchhiking around looking for work. He's he's out and about applying for jobs. He's trying to provide for his wife Judy, played by Kathleen Ryan, and his kind of annoying kid Tommy, who he's recently moved from Boston to California in hopes of starting a new life, but is becoming increasingly tired with not being able to provide them with not even just like groceries and doctors, but like just things, common American luxuries you think he should have. My kid should be able to go to a baseball game. It costs 25 cents.
Yeah, 25 cents to go to a baseball game was a really crazy price point that was mentioned in this movie. I was like, another one is at one point, Jerry, I think his name's Jerry, right?
Jerry, yes. Yep.
Yes, Jerry, the Lloyd Bridges character, mentions that he paid $6.50 for his cologne. And that's like shocking that he would pay that much for cologne. And so it's hard to like.
This guy must be a high roller. Goddamn.
Yeah, holy shit. This guy is
and that's something
a big wig.
That's something that pops up pretty much constantly, especially I guess in the first 30 minutes when they're really trying to drive home how much money pops up on his day-to-day basis, and of course as it would for everybody. Like there's first it's him giving the 50 cents to his kid, and the wife being like, that could have got us eggs and a few meals out of that, but he just kind of out of this pride, this wanting to be able to support his family and give his son whatever he wants, he just does it. There's another part where he goes to a bar, and I think the bartender gives him a more expensive beer than what he would have traditionally ordered.
He gives him an Eastern beer, a little European beer,
and he's like, he's like, you didn't say anything. He's like, yeah, but you didn't ask, and so he has to give him the extra, couple cents or whatever it is, and that just keeps happening and happening.
My favorite part about that scene where he goes into the bar after because he's like down on his luck, he's upset, and it cuts to this.
So he does what everyone does. He drinks a depression beer at a local bowling alley.
He goes to the bar /steak restaurant /diner /bowling alley, and where the guy behind the counter is telling the newspaper reporter, the other main character,
Gil.
Yeah, he's like totally fawning over Gil, and he's like, "Say, your column is really swell. I'm making veal scallopini today. Oh, hang on, this fucking jerk just walked in the door. He doesn't say that, but he's like, "Hang on, I got to deal with this jerk,
this fucking poor guy." Yeah,
jeez. Howard hasn't even said a word. It's just like a head down walking in. It's like, why are you being so mean? It's like everyone just hates him.
Yeah.
He's so put upon, and like it really is like earlier on when he passes the store, the woman at the store is like, why don't you asks her husband, like, ask him about his bill, ask him about paying his tab, and like there's this, undercurrent of just hatred going on in this town, and everyone is like very polite on the surface, and it's part of why the second that the penny drops and he gets like he gets arrested and the newspaper puts out this like very sensational piece, everyone is so ready and just to be like braying for blood, and to try and...
I always hated that fucking guy around town,
exactly,
man.
Exactly.
He always seemed like a no good character who was, gonna get up to some trouble. And it's also why he falls into the spell of Jerry so easily, played by Lloyd Bridges, who I think I don't know if we've talked about him before, but he's the deputy from High Noon, and also I always think of him as that dude in Airplane who has that sick running gag of being the addict involved in the situation, where he's like, looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking, looks like I picked the wrong week to quit amphetamines and sniffing glue, and he's very good as this like performative, very like two-bit kind of like hustler who's also the guy who is superficially nice to him. He wants to have a conversation with him. He wants to invite him in, and he has nice clothes, expensive alcohol. He's really showing off his bowling form and his body in the one scene when he brings him home to his apartment and everything. It is almost like a little like, he kind of picks him up at the bar.
Yeah,
almost.
It's like a love scene almost.
Yeah.
It is, but it's also clear he's like feeling out how much Howard will just kind of like follow social commands, like grab my shoes, like hold my mirror, carry my bag, and he's doing all this before preparing to do a bit of a bait and switch, like I'm being your friend and I've heard of a job opportunity. Turns out the job opportunity is being a driver for me while I just go around committing like various Jesse James style like robberies of banks and liquor stores and burger joints, which is something that Howard, as we know him, would be something he's incredibly uncomfortable with. And at first he's like, I'm not interested in this, but Lloyd makes his pitch. Is anyone offering you anything better lately? Like everyone's treating you like shit and not offering you any work.
He's like, you're one of those guys who just wants a handout.
A handout?
He has $10. Get out of my face. And
he's like, take this to the bank and talk about to them about what is it? Your tough. Talk to their
go
tough
to their
luck
hard
department.
luck department. Yeah.
Yeah, he seems to take advantage of his pride, essentially, where he's just like, he gives him the $10. He could, I guess, go out and get some groceries for his family for the week or whatever, but he's so down on his luck, and he's been kind of more fancy European beers. He's been so down on his luck, and he's been distrusted and kind of insulted by so many people. I think he takes this as an opportunity to do something, even if it's against the law. He's like, well, I'm going to work for my money. I won't just take this $10 he threw on the ground. So it's a really good scene of manipulation. Lloyd Bridges is awesome. He really is.
Well, he flips from charming to vicious just so fast, and he pokes this guy just in the right spot where he's desperate enough to be like, you know what? I just have to sit out front a gas station while he goes in and does the thing. Like, I'm kind of from a safe distance from it. Like, maybe I could do this, which is done in this incredible sequence that I do wish maybe the whole sequence was done this way, where it's just Frank Lovejoy sitting in the car, and in the distance behind him in the sort of passenger window, you can see Lloyd go into the gas station and go do the robbery that he's about to do. It's actually very similar to the sequence that Harmony Korine would do in Spring Breakers, of them doing the huge, like, you know, sort of like diner robbery that they do while the girls are driving the car around the side of the building. And part of me was like, man, you know, Enfield, maybe you could have kept the camera out there the whole time, but he does briefly cut in so that we can see a little bit of what Lloyd Bridges is getting up to, which is, you know, viciously beating the people inside and robbing them.
He comes out and Howard's like, "Did you have any trouble?" And he's like, "I never have any trouble."
Just
dude, we're on easy street now.
I love that.
Yeah, but I like the idea that, like, for Howard specifically, it is just like, you know, he's technically being invited to do something dangerous and violent, but, you know, Lloyd is being considerate enough to be like, you're not really doing anything. Like, you're sitting in the car. You're sitting in a car waiting for a guy to get into your car. And look at all this cash you're getting. Look at, you can buy these, you know, you can buy your wife a TV. You can buy your kid this potato chips. These are things that all American, you know, boys and girls should have.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I love the community watching a Western together. I thought that was pretty
the
awesome.
whole neighborhood is watching a Western.
It's like it feels nice at first, but given the context of the end, and the kind of like a lot of Westerns where the gunslinger, you know, killing the bad guy for justice,
getting extrajudicial justice, right?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of heartwarming at first. You're like, oh, just a tight knit community right there, watching a Western together, and then I'm not so sure.
And it's like, no, they all think they're John Wayne. Like,
yes, exactly.
Yeah. That's I didn't even pick up on that, but that's so, like, it's so true. But then, Howard brings home his new spoils to his wife and kid, and they have, like, you know, nice groceries, good shit. They've got everything. And then it cuts to Gil at this, like, dinner party that's, like, so fancy.
Yes. The journalist character played by Richard Carlson, who I only know as the main doctor guy in Creature from the Black Lagoon, who just, like, wears his swim trunks the whole time.
Nice.
But yeah, he's having a upper crust high society party, which features, hang on, I wrote it down, one of my favorite lines in the entire movie. It's someone's playing the piano and they say, "The boogie woogie is the most scientific of musical forms. The only musical form where the musician can play with one hand and feed himself with the other." And then he throws a peanut into his mouth with his free hand.
This is the kind of shit you only get in noirs, which is why we have to talk. We have to dedicate a month to them.
Quality rich people humor right there. That's good stuff.
Yeah, but Gil he's at this party and he starts hearing about his boss, who basically wants him to, you know, task him with reporting on this idea of these petty thievery cases, this, like, crime wave of robberies that is just these two guys. And, you know, he does kind of, you know, have some qualms about it, because he's like, you know, aren't we kind of, like, exaggerating this a little bit? And, you know, and this is where we do get introduced to his European mathematician buddy Vito, which apparently the inclusion of this character, by the way, was a fight that Enfield lost with the studio, that he actually did. That they were like, yeah, if you want to, like, we don't understand exactly the ideas that I guess they felt that they weren't being communicated well enough in verbally. So they were like, we need a guy who's actually there to be like, you know, wouldn't that be destructive to public health? You know, wouldn't that be a distortion of our illicit values as a society to sensationalize crime on the front page for entertainment?
So funny.
Just gives the thesis over and over again with a tone of concern. It's fantastic. It's hilarious, honestly.
It's like, what does he even do? It's unclear what he's even doing there. He says he's there for a lecture, and it's like, yeah, you are. You're lecturing us, like the audience.
Exactly.
Well, and he's there to set up Gil being like, you know, people love to be scared to death, you know, and the more you scare them, the more papers you sell. Cha-ching,
he's going Nightcrawler
mode. Yeah. But Yeah. Meanwhile, though, Jerry gets it in his head that they are going to start upgrading their methodology. That they are going to kidnap the pretty boy son of a local wealthy man named Donald Miller, and they are going to ransom him. And I thought it was a kind of a twist of irony that this guy was actually played by one of the townsmen in It's a Wonderful Life, which is like maybe the polar opposite in terms of depiction of American community. I have to wonder if that was intentional.
That is wild, actually.
Yes. Oh my God. I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, but so Jerry has Howard drive him out front of this guy's house, and there's incredible long shot of this Donald Miller guy walking from his front porch to his car, and he's doing that in the background of the frame, and it's composed so that you can see Jerry's shadow on his car in the foreground, like waiting to pounce on him when he gets in. And when he does, that's when they tie him up, they drive him to this like abandoned army sort of like training ground, which is functionally a ruin now, which is part of the commentary on sort of the post-war class desperation as well. And obviously, we kind of already talked about the real story. They don't just ransom him, they bash his head in with a rock and steal the valuables like on his body, which immediately Howard is like completely just horrified by that. One, they've upgraded to murder, but also without like much thought or reason behind it. He's like, we did this for like a fancy tie clip? Like he didn't have he didn't have anything on him.
I think Jerry's reasoning is that he became insane and is like,
that's true.
Don't you get it? Don't you get it? He thinks he's better than us.
He's going like James Cagney mode. He's just fucking...
His eyes go psycho. Like the light goes out in his eyes.
The wide like coyote eyes, basically. Yeah. I think he mentions too, the only practical thing that he comes up with is when he says he'll recognize us and say it's us if he gets caught or whatever it is once we give him back for the ransom. But you can tell
they
that
could have worn masks or something.
True. Yeah, they don't even make an effort in that sense. That's very true.
He never really makes an effort when even when he's robbing the gas station earlier, he just puts on sunglasses.
True. Yeah. He's dressed to the nines. Still the same thing. He wears the same outfit he wears out with Howard. So yeah, they're not trying very hard. And just the flip is so quick that you can tell that it was in Jerry's mind. Yeah, almost from the beginning. It seems. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, and I do like that shot too of them rolling the body down the rocks and just like this huge pile of rocks, which is actually a shot that ends up being repeated at the very end because it just is like this, it is almost like this more sort of like primal natural zone where like man, it started with one man killing another man with a rock. That's where all this started,
Yes.
And Howard though is like really affected by witnessing this because again he was used to being like, I sit in the car and I don't see what he does and there's money in my pocket, and now he's like, oh, I actually just watched him like kill this kid, and so that the contradiction of his new position, that in order to give his family like a basic quality of life, he needs to be complicit in horror that he knows that he would never have justified alone.
Yeah,
and
he
really
can't
starts
handle
to
himself. Like from the beginning, he's just absolutely mortified and pretty much.
I mean, he was already
down.
kind of drunken and sad like before this, and now he's like despairing. Frank Lovejoy's literally like trying to tear the skin off of his face.
Oh yeah,
it's like crazy when he gets home too. He like gets home and goes into his wife's bedroom, and his wife is like, oh, hello. I just had the most wonderful dream. I had the baby and it was so beautiful. It didn't even hurt at all. And everything was so perfect and sunshine. And it's just like cuts to his face and he's just looking at her like a psycho. Like he's completely dead inside. It's really sad and horrifying.
She goes on this that it's long and kind of loving description, and I think what he says back is just because she asks afterwards, "What why are you home so late?" And he's just like, "Overtime, go to sleep," and that's it. He's just dead in the soul now. He's got nothing. And even before he's a part of the murder. He is getting like very nervous. There's one part where his son turns around really quickly with his toy guns, and it just startles him. Like it seems like he already feels like he's a criminal and he's going to die by a gun or something like that. He definitely has the fear.
He has a guilty conscience for sure.
Yeah.
And also, I'm looking at my notes. I love the cut, but from him bringing home his wife's luxuries earlier, to literally Gil like pouring, pouring like juices and like basting onto a beautiful roast like turkey that's just in his backyard for this party that like no one's even touching, and like the kind of contrast between Gil, who's basically writing about this guy, this like crime wave from a position of like complete and total comfort and impunity, and the life of Howard, who like when he brings home honey baked ham like in a like pre-sealed package, his wife is like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive.
This is so heaven
fancy.
on earth. It's almost like having a child without pain.
Yeah, it's like crazy. And, and it definitely, that theme continues. And then I love in the next scene after the next morning when they're about to continue their ransom plan, Howard meets Lloyd Bridges at the
diner or whatever, right?
At the diner, and he's like, give him a steak. And I love
that shot of the pound of the slab of meat where she's like hitting it over and over again, and you could just see him imagining like a rock going into some dude's head, That's that's really grim. There's a couple really nice like really subjective and psychological moments that really hit during this section, where Jerry is like constructing this whole elaborate plan where they're going to like go on this double date with his blonde bombshell girlfriend, Velma, played by Adele Jurgens. And they're going to drive out of town and mail the ransom letter back to the family with an out of town postmark. But it turns into this whole like tense sequence where the girls start to kind of pick up on the fact that these guys kind of have weird vibes at the moment, especially Velma's like lonely single friend, who is a really sad character.
The most tragic character in this movie, and like a character that makes me so sad, like because she's like a little older, and she's like, just wants to get married, and she's like, oh, Howard has a lot of issues, but she's still down to marry him, and she's like,
he's not a creep like Jerry, and but she can pick up that Howard is like unwell in some capacity.
Like, hey, you're sweating a lot, and you were drinking a ton. Like, what is going on?
Have you tried not doing that and like taking care of yourself like a little bit more? And Howard is just like, I like that scene where he's trying to mail the letter, and Jerry freaks out and is like, oh, this is a letter to my mom. Like you can't see a letter to my mom. And then all of a sudden Howard takes it to the mailbox, where he runs into a guy who is mailing news of his first child to his families and friends. And he's just so excited to tell another human in front of, he's like, I have a kid. Isn't that like, fuck, like crazy? Isn't this amazing? It's such this like, sort of like
crazy. He says that, I think. Really strange flip
I loved this guy and how long the scene went on with him for, because it is like, there is like a social bond to community and to people sending messages to one another and kind of all like this. And they are supposed to be pretending to have like a fun night out, but it just for Howard, every single element of this is now like, it's either like a tense moment like that, like, oh my God, I'm going to get caught, or the actual club sequence turns into like this horror sequence where there's like these really sudden shifts in focus. There's these really unbalanced, like canted
cuts
angles.
Yeah.
The party goers are like laughing in these like really unpleasant and kind of like hideous, like funhouse images almost. It's like, Howard is having a horrible time.
It's definitely a scene, given the full context preceding the mob justice, where it's like everyone is focused on him as the magician comedian, kind of mockingly does the tricks to him, and everyone's laughing, and he feels as if they're laughing at him and can maybe even like kind of see right through him in a way. There's one detail in that diner scene that I really love, because it just shows like how maybe they're not the best at what they're doing here, where they have the whole ransom note, and they give you time to read it and just show like what it looks like and everything, and they have it in between the bill kind of folder that they give you, and and the waitress grabs it, and you think for a second she's just going to take it, and that would have been it. She would have read it, called the police, it would have been game over. And I just love how, one, it's not the way that it's shot, it's not really a huge moment by any means. She just kind of takes it, you get a second, like, kind of your heart skips a beat there. And then she just puts it back into the little container, and they grab it again. But it just makes me laugh how close they came with such a stupid move to getting caught in that moment.
This is such a rickety hustle.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Jerry has not planned this out at all.
Exactly. But he's and the whole time he's got this confidence, even after he does that stupid move, and you can even kind of see the fear in his face when it happens. He just goes on and on again after he realizes he got away with it, to Howard about, the date with the girls and how we can do this and that and blah blah blah. So he never stops, no matter what.
Yeah, also how he doesn't pick up on, like, how the vibes are so off with Howard, and, like, that he's a liability at this point. Because, like, he's getting so drunk. He's practically falling asleep on Velma's friend's arm. And, and because he's in the company of, like, someone else who seems kind of kind and kind of lonely, he gets the crime off his chest by confessing to her and basically being like, people, sometimes
I didn't think he was going to kill her. I didn't think he was going to kill her.
Yeah, and he's like, why did he have to kill him? I've never... And I love the line, my favorite line that he does is when he's like, I've never been in trouble before.
Yeah, it's so
like, he's
heartbreaking. And she is like equally heartbroken, because she's like thinking like, finally, I'll get married to this guy. Like, finally. And meanwhile...
And it turns out he's the monster from the Crime Wave article she's been reading in like the background of the scene. Like...
Yes, exactly.
There's another great moment with Jerry. I guess it's just another example of like him being able to go back and forth between this very charming person to a very scary and dominant person when he's with the blonde woman. I'm sorry, blanking on
Velma.
her name. Velma. And he goes from like hurting her to kissing her in a matter of 5 or 10 seconds. And it just gives off exactly what he's been presenting this whole time. But it's one of those moments you kind of see violence with someone that isn't involved with any job or anything like that. It's just he's willing to kind of take advantage of everybody that's involved in his life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's a moment where he's kind of threatening to hurt a woman, which is contrast a little bit with Frank Lovejoy when he's freaking out, and he actually briefly thinks about doing something violent to her as well.
True, and it technically does, Like, I mean, just full out does, and then regrets it like midway through. But it's a very terrifying and I guess desperate moment for him. And
he thinks about like strangling her to death basically to cover this up, but because of his guilt and he instead starts to tearing at his own face again, essentially, which gives her enough time to run away and tearfully go and get the police, which results in this like crazy sequence where like his like community and house gets like raided while Judy is out looking for him because he's been missing for a couple days, and it's shot in this way where the whole town is like tuning into this pathetic arrest, and and they're all just like brutal eyes everywhere. It's like a 1950s episode of like Cops, as we get like handheld and like all of these officers are coming up to arrest him, and they actually start like chasing him like through the lawn and everything like that. And it's the beginning of like this is about to turn into a community-wide story, because so far through a lot of this movie anyway, there's been hints of it, but we have been pretty locked in with these two guys. And the movie really, really does expand when, Gil starts writing about the arrests as, not from a perspective of having pity or by the act of desperate men, but as, this was a brutal piece of deliberate torture by like absolute fucking monsters of our community who need to be like taken out of our community.
Yes, and the sheriff like warns him. The sheriff is like, "Hey, man, you gotta cool it with this, or else it's gonna be trouble." Yeah,
you're gonna turn your friends into animals, and they're all gonna just start trying to like absolutely rip these men to shreds. It reminded me of the section in the Truman Capote book In Cold Blood, where they find the two killers and they actually start like interrogating them and they plan to hang them, but no one has any sense of like being able to make sense how they rationalized what they did, and the state has like no response to it. You know, they're like, we actually don't know how to address this. So, I mean, I guess we just publicly hang them and hope people don't do it anymore. You know, like that's kind of what Capote's book is about, is that it's just like we have no way of making sense of this kind of stuff. And, you know, the actual punishment for it doesn't, you know, it also doesn't make sense as a result. And so you have this like sensationalized sort of like crowd forming around this trial, like an economy of entertainment, which is where you kind of get a little bit of the ace in the hole aspect as well. And the Kirk Douglas, very cutthroat sort of like journalist character. Gil kind of replaces that role a little bit in this for calling him so much of a monsters in the paper and very much dehumanizing them. And it really does take Judy, Howard's wife, coming back to be like, look, here's a letter that, you know, Howard sent me, where he really which is the most Oxbow incident thing in the movie, because that movie also ends on the letter getting read by the guy who is about to be killed, where it's like, you know, where it's very much like he's expressing guilt and sorrow. And, you know, even though in the Oxbow incident, they also didn't even do it, which is crazy. He's expressing guilt and sorrow for the guys who are, for the crime they're about to commit of killing him. in this case, he's like, you know, I didn't know Jerry was going to kill him, but it's not an excuse. Like, I still partook. I'm guilty. I deserve to die, and I'm no good. And I just hope you'll forgive and forget me. It's fucking brutal.
Yeah, it's the part that crushes me is that he's like to his wife, he's like, forget me. Don't think about me anymore. And then later on, when Gil sees him in the jail, he's like, tell my wife I love her. No, don't even tell her that. Don't do that to her. Tell her to forget me. Yeah. And it's like, that's like really heartbreaking to me, that he's like, he can't even express his love or anything to his wife, but the
without causing more pain, right?
Yes, yeah. And then Gil is after she reads him after she reads Gil this letter after he writes, I think the headline of the article that eventually gets them killed is because he is pretty explicitly responsible for the lynch mob that does occur, because his article's like headline is like it's like 2 psycho killers expected to go free or something, and it's just total nonsense. And it's like the trial hasn't even started yet, but he's like, yeah, they're gonna use the insanity plea and like get off scot-free, and like,
meanwhile you still have his European friend in the background being like, you must not sensationalize, you know, men don't live in a vacuum, they live with one another.
My favorite suggestion from the European friend is when he's like, why don't you put the editorials on the front page and you put the crime news on the back page?
Yeah.
It's like, that's kind of a stupid idea, man.
It's like, yeah, you know, you're not going to sell any papers, but it's good for the social fabric of the community.
People are just going to
skip, man.
People are just going to skip to the back page, dude.
Yeah.
But the wife reads the letter to Gil, and he's like, oh fuck. He's like, holy shit,
what have I done?
Yeah. And then he tries to go remedy the situation by, you know, getting the newspaper to print something other than horrible vitriolic, you know, emotionally stoking.
I do like him running into the printing room and being like, is it too late? And they're like, dude, it's printing. Like, what do you mean? You can see it printing right behind you.
It is great how they portray the trial in general, because they don't really focus on, you know, any of the court or anything like that. It's really just the media frenzy and how individuals, like the characters we've been introduced to, are reacting to that media frenzy. Some are using it for their own advantage. Some are just horrified that this is all going to be publicized to the world. But I love what they choose to focus on rather than just, you know, what we already know. You know, they didn't need anything else other than kind of what they're preeing to the mob destruction that we're going to see in the following.
Well,
10
that's
minutes.
why it's so interesting that in like the last 15 minutes, they're like, what if suddenly now this is the Oxbow incident? Like, what if suddenly this is like all of a sudden, everyone is just knows that we're building towards this awful thing, and we're also angry and impatient enough to do it. Like, it's just this grim anticipation of like this thing that is at this point it's rolling on the tracks already.
Yeah,
you can't resist it, you can't overpower it. Even if you go, oh shit, I was wrong, why did I print that, oh my god, it's like, no, it's begun. And there's huge wide shots of like the crowd forming outside the jailhouse, these amazing shots, so many extras for the scene, and just like
1,000 people easily. It's
crazy.
So many people.
And the honking and the yelling and just Howard and Jerry's sweaty faces like behind the shadowy bars as they can just like hear the ambient atmosphere outside of just like pure hatred just brewing. And they're like, oh my god, like this is gonna make its way in, like it's coming.
The spotlight going back and forth across the jail cells, and Jerry going like,
great
Howard,
shot.
I'm gonna fucking kill you. Like going.
Yeah, this is where the most like sort of like expressionist imagery kind of starts hitting with some of the lighting and some of the use of just like the sort of labyrinthian use of the prison a little bit, as well as like the sheriff is like declaring, you are all law-abiding citizens. These men are entitled to a democratic trial. And they're like, we're going to give them the same trial they gave Donald Miller. There ain't no laws against doing what is right.
That's the thing. It's presented as such a promise that this is going to happen. Like at no point do you feel like this mob is going to be calmed down. Every step that they take, the mob is overpowering them, like through the audio, even as he's, like basically megaphoning out to the people, you really can't hear compared to just the screams of the people. They're giving like a timeline at a certain point. Like I think it's 11 p.m. They're rushing the court or rushing the jail station. And I think that's actually true too. I think that was based on the real lynching that happened.
The actual
like they
storming.
were like, by 11 we're going in, and it's terrifying. There really feels like there's no stopping them.
Yeah, the first time I saw this, I was like, because I did see this on TCM. I think I saw both these movies on TCM.
Oh my god, I just said that as like a joke at the beginning.
Yeah,
there you go.
But the Noir Alley, a great TCM segment that plays sometimes. But I love the sheriff going to Howard's cell, and Howard's like, are you going to be able to hold him back? And the sheriff's like, not looking good. But the first time I saw this, I really did think something was going to happen at the end. I'm like, there's no way this movie from like 1950 is going to
just
like
tear two
lynch
people
the
apart.
main characters, right?
Yeah.
But they do. They actually fully do.
They fully do.
It's such a crazy sequence because it's basically a 10 or 15 minute long, nearly wordless sequence of just footage of. It starts with the cops just like putting on the gas masks and tear gassing the entire crowd. Who is trying to ram their way up the stairs into the jailhouse. But then the crowd fights back using. The crowd uses a giant fire hose as a weapon, and just the handheld immediacy of the photography of this assault is really wild for 1950. And just the focus on the raw noise, the kind of brute force, like frenzied rampaging of these characters. One of my favorite shots was just like all of the dudes heaving on the door like they're storming Troy or something. Like it does become like it's such a crazy moment that leads into that like wonder of them raiding the office, which is one of the most gorgeous shots in the movie of them. It's like hallway shot that then dollies over into the room, and you can just see, you can hear them coming up the stairs. You can see this like mass of bodies just like flooding in like zombies, and they're like stealing the keys from the guy, but it's done in this incredible shot where he's like literally running from one room to the other room to grab the keys, and he ends up grabbing them, and it's in this close-up shot of him holding them, struggling to resist this crowd, and they literally like yank it out of his hands, and they start making their way through it. It's really crazy watching them just like infect each room of this like of this jail place just with violent hysteria.
One of my favorite little moments like that is when there's a moment where it shows inside one of the jail cells, and there's like an old man with a hearing aid in the jail cell, and he just takes out his hearing aid because it's just loud. It's so like funny and like horrifying at the same time.
Yeah. There's also just how like we already mentioned just how many extras there are in that street scene, but there are honestly a ton of extras too when they start to get inside the station. Like Josh, like what you were just saying, when they take the keys from the guy, it seems like it's hundreds of people piling into that one room. And there is honestly
barely fitting through the doors and shit.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like it's a mass of bodies. They're like falling over each other and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. And at a certain point, especially when the two guys that, you know, they're trying to get are captured by them, I honestly was feeling kind of scared for just the actors outside of the characters, just physically, because it really feels like at a certain point it would be hard to completely control all of that. They use a lot of extras, and it really feels authentically chaotic and physical, like very violent.
Because the extras are like old ladies and like young men, like old men. Like it's a total cross section of like a community, basically, and it's so like.
And there's no time between, like, they don't just carry them away. They basically circle beat them after they get out of their cells, and you see all of that. And then there's just so much.
I do like Jerry briefly being like, "Dude, what if I went like?"
Yeah, he's like, "Come on
for a second." You know, I'm gonna do the whole hallway fight, and they just immediately swarm him.
And they like crowd surf Howard down the stairs after like at one point, and like. Yeah, it's
Oh my god, that shot of him crowd surfing down, and you have Gil seeing the reflection of him being crowd surfed, where he's like, oh, they're literally gonna drag this man out like screaming and crying, and you know, it's like literally a sea movement that I can't stop from happening.
Yeah.
It's just gonna go right by me.
Yeah. That's what's a really terrifying thought is the cut from the mob violence to the son waking up as if it's a nightmare, and us knowing full well that it absolutely is not, and he is about to get a rude awakening. It's incredibly well done. This finale especially is so good.
It's a really well-directed sequence, and it's so like obviously we've talked about how great visually it is and how it breaks the kind of movie it is to do this, where you're like, no, well, you can't, you've set this up. We care about this working class dude who fell into petty crime, you know, like you can't just like have a rampaging mob just have a 15-minute violent set piece where they drag him out to kill him in the street. That's not really cathartic, you know. It's not really
and then
it's not really a great story, you know.
It's like the ultimate catharsis for the people in the town, and it's like the antithesis of a catharsis for like the people watching the movie. It's like so.
No, and I thought there was something genius about the fact that they don't even build to the catharsis of the crowd like doing it and like having the reactions to it or anything. It's like they drag him out, and we stick with Gil and the guy who runs the paper and like the chief of police, and they basically just hear the noise get further and further away as they presumably take them to where they're going to hang them. And that's that's what we're left sitting in, is just like this like giant noisy crazy frenzy just like took us for a couple minutes, and then it's gone, and we know what they're going to do, and we couldn't stop them. And now, that was that.
And now the only thing that they're left with, at least like this last thought is, well, maybe you can say like, don't let them forget it. Don't let them forget what has happened tonight, and maybe we can learn from this. But
the sound of fury.
But we also know, given the real story, that everyone did forget, and completely. Some people thought it was just justice, including the governor in charge. So it's pretty crazy to even see that ending and have them be like, we've learned our lesson, and in reality, nobody did. So
because that's what the movie's trying to be, right? It's like, remember this thing that happened in the 1930s? That was pretty fucked up, you know?
That's pretty wild, huh?
And I really love that, like, it's like so good. It's maybe my favorite scene in an American noir movie, which is why I knew I was like, I gotta bring this one on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incincredible, and that is literally the ending. Like it's crazy. Like it's such a grim ending.
Vito has like a little what's the like an what is it ADR kind of thing where it goes over top and narrates his thesis.
Yeah, he has a little bit of recurring flashback voiceover of one of the things he was saying earlier about, sort of like the social breakdown of,
right.
of violence, all of this. They're like, all right, Vito. Yeah. I get it.
But it's great.
This primal, it's modern, you're getting the crazy cars, you're getting the rocks,
It's like Vito,
I see where you're going.
Yeah. We're sick of, get out of here, man. Shut up, Vito.
Yeah. But no, it's very good. And I do think it's very funny that one of the few things I could find about that, because I was literally trying to research what happened there, and Enfield did basically say that the amount of Vito that's in the movie was a fight he lost with the studio. And that is really the only, like, honestly, the only thing that I find kind of like a little bit annoying about the movie. Totally. Other than that, like, if we're pivoting towards reductive rating around, this was a very, very solid 4 for me. I think it's really crazy because I actually did not know this mob lynching story at all, so it was interesting to see to just have that aspect and go research it. If anyone wants to look it up, I think it was the Brooke Leopold Hart. If you Google him, you should come up with the entire story. But it's pretty accurate to that, and is a good entry point to be like, we'll start in the realm of like a petty crime, sort of post-war financial desperation noir. Like you've seen a movie where like a vet comes back and he doesn't have money and he's got to get into like the mob. Like this is like it's very familiar noir territory, and then seeing him introduce the sort of sensationalist crime media stuff, start throwing in the sort of the collective psychological effects of this hysteria that is building, and this hatred and this distrust amongst the community and everything like that. So I think that Enfield does a really good job handling all of that. Obviously, the points of comparison here are all movies I love: The Oxbow Incident, The Hitchhiker, Ace in the Hole, even a little bit of In Cold Blood. And this actually predates most of those except for Oxbow Incident.
Right.
Which is the only one that had come before it. So it's pretty cool to see all of that in kind of a B-noir. And I think, honestly, the performances are really good. Like, I like Frank Lovejoy. Again, he's sweaty. He's tormented. He's tearing his face off. You've got Lloyd Bridges, who is incredibly just like charming but just absolutely manipulative and vicious on a dime in a way that makes him really uncomfortable, and how fast he just slips into going insane and killing people, and how horrible it is for Howard. Is you do get that tense claustrophobic experience being locked in with those two characters. And so, like, it's good as that type of movie. And then it's like, what if that type of movie was literally just absolutely steamrolled by one of the most horrifying and grim finales, where, Enfield really, really gets to show off both visually and sonically with that entire jailhouse raid sequence, and the pure chaos and frenzy of it is incredibly well done. And in my opinion, unlike the studio guys, I guess, I was like, I thought it got the message across pretty well.
Yeah.
Did the job for sure.
That you know what? Crime and violence are a kind of moral, social, and economic failure, and more of a sign of a defective environment than necessarily an individual psychology. And I think that Enfield absolutely captured that in, formally and in the narrative, without having a suave Marxist European man say that to you out front. But again, basically the only qualm I have with it, this was very solid. I'm very glad that I watched it, and it's incredibly underseen. So
it is.
People should, I think it's only like angry. 2K. It's wildly stylized. People should check it out.
Yeah, I think it's only got like 2,000 entries on Letterboxd or something like that. So
that's
definitely
insane.
underseen.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah,
we got to get those numbers up.
It is one of the best noir endings, especially that I've
apparently
seen. Really
by the way, Martin Scorsese owns the only remaining 35mm print. So Martin,
oh my god,
release.
Come on,
yeah, we need, the people need to see it. Yeah, I'm also going to give it a 4. Agreed with everything you said, really. I think that this is... I just love the level of control that Enfield has with kind of starting it off like a more traditional melodrama noir and then turning it into this almost horrifying like thriller, almost horror movie kind of thing at the end. And the level of control he has when it does break into the chaos is fantastic. That whole 15-minute finale building the mob and then when they're just unleashed into the station is truly incredible. It's really good. And just as a coincidence, I saw that the composer for this actually did Ace in the Hole as well, just as a kind of a
Let's
connection.
go.
We've been talking about it. And the one last thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know, we might have mentioned it and I just missed it, but there's that weird moment where with kind of Hazel's like desperate loneliness where she seems to drug Howard at a certain point and then like kisses him while he's kind of unconscious during that date sequence.
Oh yeah, and that is true.
And it's a moment. They don't return to it or anything like that. But it does do a good job, this movie, of showing just everybody's kind of their personal issues, what they're going through, what this kind of environment is doing to people, I guess, in different ways. But yeah, just that was a very strange moment, and I wanted to include it if we didn't. So anyway, it's really good stuff. So 4 out of 5.
Yeah, for you, Hesse.
I would do 5 out of 5. I really love this movie.
Oh, let's go.
Yes, I really love the ending and how evil the ending is, and how like spooky it is. And I do. It is
unsettling.
Yeah, and I love the like little, the sweatiness of it. Mm-hmm. And I love a good sweaty evil noir, and the ending really is like the cherry on top for me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just shocked at how it really does like decide to just break the movie that you've been watching. Like you feel like that you're familiar with this kind of story, and then it's like it hits the trial, and it's like, no, this is where it's going. We're gonna go with the grimmest, most unsentimental and like just like angry, violent ending you could possibly
and I think them setting it up in these like hoity-toity rich party rooms is a way for you to kind of feel at ease that whatever they're talking about won't necessarily happen. Like you're not seeing it come from the ground up. You're just seeing it appear at a certain point, and that's the terrifying thing. It's like they didn't know what they were doing because they can't see it kind of swell. Even though they're given the proper warnings. That's not what I'm saying, but yeah. I think that's kind of. But
cool they're in a bubble. They're in their ivory towers.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Hesse made a good point when it was like how much we spend with Gil in his like very comfortable rooms versus Howard in his not. And so when you see the ending, these are all these characters thinking they're getting justice, but it literally is a bunch of very comfortable rich people just dragging a poor man out into the street and killing him for being desperate and falling for a hustler's plan, right? Like it's like if you start to really think about that, it's it's a very left-wing idea presented in a very shocking and tense and very blunt fashion that is pretty upsetting to watch.
Yeah.
And also it got Enfield blacklisted. He literally had to flee the country in less than a year after making this movie. So
that's hard as fuck.
So yeah, if you haven't seen The Sound of Fury, would very much recommend it. But that is going to wrap it up on The Sound of Fury, and we're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Shadow on the Wall. Stick around.
It's the whole rest of my life you want this time. My own husband.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Shadow on the Wall, the 1950 psychological thriller film noir directed by one Patrick Jackson, adapted by William Ludwig from a 1943 published story called Death in the Doll's House, and starring Ann Southern, Zachary Scott, and Gigi Perot, the little girl, apparently like MGM's darling child who had been in like
Gigi Pro.
Gigi Perot. That's what it is.
She was in like 20 movies before this one or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. They had her on that Judy Garland grind.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And also Nancy Davis Reagan, Miss First Lady herself in
The Throat Goat. The Throat Goat is in this, everyone.
And was this her? I don't remember if I read that this was her debut or not. Was this her debut?
I don't think it was.
I think what I read was that she did a few smaller roles, but this was her big kind of breaking.
Oh
role.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, she did only 2 other roles, both in 1949, and this was definitely her highest build, because her other one she was last billed in a movie with Janet Leigh and Glenn Ford. And then she's apparently in a Mervyn LeRoy film as well. The guy who did like I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang and Little Caesar. So that's sort of interesting. I might want to check that out.
What the hell?
Yeah, called East Side West Side. So might have to check that out. But yeah, this one is I could tell instantly. I actually didn't even have to look this up to find this out. So this was MGM's response to a little RKO hit that we've covered on this podcast. A really great film, actually, by the cinematographer of the Alfred Hitchcock film Notorious, a guy named Ted Tetzlaff. And in 1949, he had a huge hit of a thriller film called The Window.
Love that
which
movie.
is this very dark, very tense child endangerment noir film about a kid witnessing a murder and basically trying to warn everyone who will listen to him. But because he's like known for spending his days like kind of like lying and dreaming and making up stories, that like, you know, he's like a Western hero or an adventure hero, and, you know, no adults believe him. And so no adults believe him when he's like, yeah, I saw like a Rear Window style murder, and the 2 people who did it are like actually trying to like break into my apartment and kill me and shit. And everyone's like, oh, this little scamp, you know, what's he talking about? It's a really, really great film. And also for anyone interested in like sort of like New York location work on film, the location shooting of the Lower East Side in that is like one of the earliest like majority on location actual street shooting for a noir film. So it's really gorgeous to look at.
That's where I live. Hey.
That's right.
Forget about it.
But The Window was such a huge hit with audiences and for RKO that MGM literally went like, wait, don't we have the rights to like a story about like a little girl who witnesses a murder or something? You know, like, you know, she witnesses like her aunt kill her mom, frame her dad, you know, something like that, you know, and thus this film was born. And they apparently, you know, it had a little bit of development problems where, you know, they lost a director and they had to bring in this guy named Pat Jackson, who was this British filmmaker who apparently came from like a wealthy family that lost all of their money in the 1929 stock market crash. And so he was like all British people. He was like, what if I work for the post office? And so he got into film by being in the marketing department at the post office, which eventually became the UK government's like Ministry of Information film department. And so he was like making documentary films about like, you know, like the wartime effort, you know, come on guys, and you know, that kind of stuff. And so I have no idea how he got on MGM's radar, but they brought him in to replace a director on this. This is only American film, and it bombed so hard that he never made an American film again.
Damn.
It's too bad.
Yep. Poor. I mean, he comes up with a couple striking images. It's definitely not his fault.
Yeah.
And you know, the premise of this Death in the Doll's House, which was like this sort of like serialized Saturday Evening Post thriller story, is you know, it's a quite tense and kind of perverse one. So you know, I do think that if we'll eventually compare it to some other movies that have done this premise, I don't know if it's necessarily the most athletic and the most tense one they've ever made. Out of this, but it's pretty good. It's pretty solid, and it's pulpy and it's fun.
Yeah. I love movies like this. Like Shadow of a Doubt also is my favorite Hitchcock movie. It's like one of my favorite movies ever. And
Corruption within the home, that kind of thing.
Yes.
More
This
anti-Americanism from Hesse.
Yes. Exactly.
Lock her up.
Yes. But what I love about this one is that it goes from the very beginning. When I was first watching this on TCM, I was like, oh, this must be like a family drama type thing about like a wife who cheats on her husband, and like they have to like deal with that.
Oh, that's such a funny way to like, because you were just randomly threw it on, like no idea what it was.
Yeah,
that's so funny. I could totally see that.
And it suddenly became this movie about like Anne Southern trying to Wile E. Coyote style kill a child in different Looney Tunes ways by like in this like psych ward. I was just like, oh, this is so funny.
Strange.
I kind of love this.
Yeah, because I totally, like, I knew the premise going into it because I kind of looked up what it was in advance when Hesse was pitching it, but I could totally see that anyone who just like was just browsing TCM one day, and the opening stuff of it, which is just like, one, it has this incredible opening shot, which is the shot that like looks like a normal sort of like White House and the yard and the fence and everything like that. It's very ominous music over it, and it's revealed by the end of the credits to be the little girl Susan Starling's dollhouse in her bedroom. And so like that's a kind of like a strange mood setter, and it's a little off-putting, but like if you miss that part, the opening stuff of this, it's like the father, David, played by Zachary Scott from Mildred Pierce, he's just like, he's returned home from like a 6-week business trip, and his
it's so
the
happy
stepmom,
and loving and everything like that.
Yep.
At least at first,
the nice little familial melodrama where the stepmom Celia, played by Christine Miller, she feels a little distant from the daughter feels a little distant from her stepmom and thinks that she doesn't really care for her father, and which he thinks is a really cruel thing for her to think, but it bears some truth when he catches her lying about being at a matinee with her girlfriend, and instead she was out and about with her sister Dell's pinstriped mustachioed fiance, a man named Crane, played by Tom Helmore, who is actually the husband who hires Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo, and it took me a while to place him, but I was like, why do I recognize this guy? It's
sorry,
go ahead.
Just real quick, one of my favorite, because I think it just lines up with how this film is presented, and then kind of just very bluntly goes into the like family corruption stuff, is the opening where it's just the suburban home, and it's this like lovely, beautiful orchestral music, and as soon as the title card pops up, it dives right into this like this mysterious evil something is lurking beneath kind of music, and it's so just so blatant the way it goes from that to this, that I found, honestly, I really enjoyed. But I think it was kind of showing you the simplicity of what's going to be presented to you as compared to maybe some other noirs.
Yes, it's very Looney Tunes in its presentation. Like there's like the part where, which I really love about it. I don't know. I find it kind of hypnotic and like entrancing. Like the parts where, Anne Southern after killing her sister, and then her brother-in-law takes the blame for it. Mm-hmm. She writes a letter like confessing everything and is about to mail it to the police. But goes to get her hair done first, and she imagines that the hairdressing thing is like an electric chair that she's being strapped into, and it's like, it's so like a Bugs Bunny, Wile E. Coyote. It's so good, and like the little girl is like exaggerated, like screams, and like the weird, the
psychology that happens in this,
where
they're this is how you unlock the inner memories that you have, and kind of eventually once they get to some of the evidence, when the doctor's breaking it down, and we'll break all this down, but it gets very excuse me, I don't know, pseudo intellectual or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, she's looking at this
1950s
direction,
psychiatry is what I would call it.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, I got a kick out of that too. I kind of enjoyed them trying to break down every little psychology step so that things made sense and all of that.
Yeah, but I really do love that it like takes like the opening like 20 or 30 minutes before it even reveals that aspect of it. Like it is just
I think
like
it's 40 minutes on the dot because it's like an 80-minute movie, and I think I paused
here
it
is like
coincidentally.
an adultery melodrama where Anne Southern, who is the sister of the stepmom, and Anne Southern, by the way, only ever seen her in the Curtis Harrington film The Killing Kind. But she's really good in that film as like the overbearing mother to like a psycho killer, essentially. And in this, they try to give her like a little bit of like a Gloria Graham kind of look, and try to play her in that realm. But I very much enjoyed that it was just at first like, you know, they start throwing in the sort of subtle lighting changes and camera movements as characters start like probing each other's deceptions and everything. But it is like a scene of like, you know, David questioning, you know, like the father questioning the stepmom, you know, who, you know, he saw her get dropped off by the fiance, and she just lies about it to his face. And, you know, he's kind of like drenched in shadows when he hears that lie, and you're like, oh, well, what the fuck's going on here? And then there's a huge push in on Dell's face as he confronts both Crane and the stepmom at the same time, you know, tricking them essentially into admitting that he went to the play too, and that he was not in a business meeting as he had told the sister.
Yeah,
and
they told
so, you
separate
know,
lies to each of their spouses / fiancés.
Yeah, and that push it on Dell when that gets exposed, and she's kind of putting two and two together, and you know, so like there's these really great moments where you're starting to get a little bit of the sort of dark, sort of psychological noirish sort of camera trickery, but it is all just like, I caught you cheating. And that, and, you know, that's the extent of how like dark this is. And it's like, you know, shots of them drinking and dining and doing general pleasantries around the house become these like wide shots of David like quietly shuffling them out the door and into the building elevator, or rummaging through the bedroom as seen through sort of like Celia's mirror, which turns into this like tense, violent argument sequence which is where the movie makes its transition, where David discovers Crane's handkerchief in his bedroom robe and starts moving towards the stepmom Celia, brandishing this souvenir gun, you know, that he just got in like he had in his suitcase from his trip, and she's like, put it away. She's like freaking out, and she bashes him over the head with this like big brass like hand mirror, thinking that she's like killed him. And that's when Dell is the one who comes in and reassures her, you haven't killed your husband. Everything's going to be fine. But at the same time, I'm going to unload years of resentments on you for what you've just done to me. Like you've had an affair with my fiance, and this is like when you took my dress when we were kids. This is like
He's like, you always get everything you want. And then she freaks out and, you know, accidentally shoots her with the gun, basically, and is like, oh, fuck. And then the little girl is in the doorway and sees the
titular shadow.
The titular shadow on the wall.
I did laugh, honestly, when the Celia gets shot after, you know, she kind of works herself up into a rage, being like, you know, you ruined my first date. Now you've taken my fiance. You've taken my home. You've taken my whole life, you know, and it's my turn to live. She's like, bam, you know, pulls the guns out, shoots her. And she, you know, it's a very impulsive decision. And the imagery of Celia, like very exaggeratedly falling and like pulling at the lamp as it falls and breaks on the floor, just in the perfect spot so it could cast this massive, imposing shadow on the wall, just in time for the little girl to like not see anything other than her dead stepmom, her father, like, you know, being reawoken from being unconscious and being beaten over the head. Yeah. And she just starts screaming at the sight of this shadow and freaking out.
My favorite thing about that's kind of funny, is that right after the Celia character does the exaggerated fall, the dad wakes up for 2 seconds and then like literally gets up and then passes out like immediately again. Like
he takes 2 steps and then falls on his face.
2 steps. They did like the 3-step punch from Kill Bill on him. But the dad like falls, and the shadow on the wall is like an outline of what Dell is wearing, and it's basically like
it's like this feather in her cap almost kind of deal. Yeah,
she has a feather in her cap, and she has and basically one of the psychological elements going on with them trying to decode who exactly use the little girl's like psyche to figure out who killed her. To figure out who killed her is the dad got her a toy when he got home from his business trip.
That's right, yeah.
And the toy is like a pretty non-politically correct Native American doll with like a feather in its hair.
That she calls Cupid.
Yeah, she calls Cupid because he has like a bow and arrow. And I guess the darkness of the shadow on the wall in that shape, it reminds the girl of the doll, which is, very, very interesting.
Which leads to some unbelievable sequences where they start to have almost these like inner dream sequences or in her mind sequences where they're connecting these two images. And so you have the silhouette of the doll and the shadow on the wall kind of like coming together slowly until the shapes kind of line up, and that's how you figure out the psychology.
It wasn't my dad who killed my mom. It was this Native American man who just walked in.
It's really, she really is like, they get to that point after a point, and it's very like, it's so Looney Tunes and crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
super wild.
And the way that it moves is very funny because it is just like immediately after that scene, it's like cut to the courtroom. The judge is like, the dad did it. Yeah, I sentenced him to death. Bam.
He has 2 weeks to live. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, my favorite is when the judge is like,
and I love he accepts it too. He's like, well, you know what? I don't remember, killing her.
I guess
but it makes sense. The last thing I remember is pointing a gun at her, and then I was, unconscious. So, I guess I shot her.
He has all the psychological depth of Howard writing his letter in that moment when he's like, well, them the breaks. I really love like in the courtroom when the judge is like, all right, guilty, sentenced to death. I assume that the defense will make the usual appeals. And the defense attorney's like, yes, we will, Your Honor. And he's like, all right, they're denied. Gavel. It's like, I don't think that's how it works.
Let's have lunch.
I think someone else has to say it.
Oh, that's so funny. I did one detail I do like in that scene, I think it ends it, is Dell is wearing all black, and they have this shot of her leaving with the rest of the crowd of people, and she seems to be the only one. It gave like a kind of like a funeral vibe, but it's strange with her character because at first she does seem, I mean, besides the off the handle kill your sister moment, she does seem very like a sympathetic character. And at first she seems to actually feel kind of guilty about what has happened and what.
Yeah, you see her openly suppress, like speaking up and like being like, he didn't do it, Judge.
Yeah, and you can tell that there's that guilt. And this is before, of course, she has what we were talking about with the hairdresser sequence and all that. Her fear comes into play. But I do like that initially visual. She's presented that way, and then she just gets more and more evil from there, really.
Well, because I think it's meant to be similar to the Frank Lovejoy thing, right? Where she's meant to be very normal, and in a moment of kind of sympathetic just fury, she did this thing, and now she kind of has to commit to doing this thing.
Yeah.
Now, even though she doesn't think of herself as someone capable of it.
Yeah. The movie itself doesn't even really present her initially as like the star or anything. You'd think that it's going to focus on
which is why David. I was so shocked. It's why I was so shocked when like it becomes this
Yeah,
like
totally.
crazy comedy of errors of a woman trying to murder a child.
Yeah.
And it is funny to think about a movie that is structured around the aspect that we know who the murderer is the whole time. And we spend most of this runtime with her as she's like, am I going to kill this kid? Is it possible to kill this kid without getting caught? I don't know. We're going to figure that out as we kind of go along. And like, I thought it at a certain point was going to be more about the kid, maybe because I was so primed by The Window, which is the kid's perspective the whole time, and even Shadow of a Doubt, which so many of the scenes are, mostly from the niece's perspective. But this really never gives over to Susan, the little girl. We have a couple of scenes with her,
that are pretty good. I do like the one with the boy and the glass of milk.
That's a good scene.
Oh my God, that is Looney Tunes ass shit. You can't say that's not Looney Tunes.
Such a ridiculous scene. But even the scenes like just in the psychiatry, office in general, where she's like, being observed through this one-way mirror playroom at the institution run by Dr. Caroline Canford, who is, Miss, First Lady of President Ronald Reagan, Miss Nancy Reagan, who
maybe
again,
one of the most evil women of the 20th century. Just casually trying to probe into this child's head.
I do think it's funny.
And what's crazy is she's good in the movie. Like I actually thought her performance is very caring and very determined.
Yeah, and I do what I like too, and I understand like why she would be doing it, because she's trying to help the child and solve the case and everything like that. But I do like that. Really, 9 times out of 10, when she's interacting with Susan, she's kind of manipulative as well as as
100%.
But she's doing it in this way that's trying to like fix her what she's going through mentally. And solve
one of the most unaddressed aspects of this movie, in my opinion, is that she is openly trying to be like, hey, little girl, I know that you like don't remember this incredibly traumatic thing.
And it's because it traumatized you and it's so painful that you don't like, you're blocking it. But please enter into that space again.
She's like, if you just remember it for 1 second, it'll cure
everything will be
you.
good again.
And
cure you.
And it would really do well for my career, please.
And it does. It cures her.
Yeah. Well, and great imagery too of her trying to like therapeutically, like visually recreate the space and actually like draw out the repressed memory of that night, so to help her presumably overcome her, shock or her trauma surrounding it. And in the process of doing that, she discovers that, she saw a murder, that it didn't go down exactly as it went down, but she saw this strange shape, and in time, through these sort of little processes, they might be able to progress it into, having a little bit of a clearer picture, because she's like, was it like a guilty fantasy figure where a girl couldn't believe her dad did it, so she projected it onto this shadow, or was there someone else physically in the room who might have done that? And they are pretty open about the fact that that's what they're investigating, and they all do just include Anne Southern's Dell in every step of that process. So you get so much of this movie is just the doctors being like, yeah, so we think that there was someone else in the room, and she's going to tell us like tomorrow. And you just get Dell just like in the corner being like, well, that's not good. Like that's a kind of a problem. And I love that hilarious phone call she places where she's like, hey, Mr. Lawyer, best friend of my husband, whatever. Can someone be convicted on the testimony of a child? And he's like,
oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, like obviously. What do you mean? Like, children aren't like, just incompetent, like they know what they see, like and she's like, that's kind of a problem.
Thanks for that information. Goodbye.
It's so funny because like every time she talks to them, she's like, hey, so no progress, right? And they're like, oh no, we just had a ton of progress. We're so close now. We're so close.
I'd give it a few hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, no, you're not that close. You should stop now. And they're like, no. And there's even a part like towards the end where they figure out that there was this shadow on the wall. They're like, it could be Dell, right? It could have been Dell. And the other doctor is
he's like, no.
That's silly. Come on.
She's been hanging out in all the meetings. What do you mean?
Yes, that's his defense. It's like, no, it couldn't be her. She's been hanging out. We've told her everything we've been doing. And
I like how,
like, yeah, I guess you're right.
And I like how too that conversation, like what they're saying implies that she hasn't even popped up once in their head as like as a suspect. And I'm like, she is literally the one, possibly the only one alive right now, or not in prison with the motivation. So what the fuck?
Yeah, that is one of the funniest things when they're like, well, we don't really understand. Like Crane had no motive. He couldn't have possibly been involved in this. And they were like, well, what about the woman who, her sister cheated on her fiance?
I don't see it.
Her. Like,
I'm not seeing it.
They were like, well, I guess that would be motive technically.
I don't fuck with the vision. I don't fuck with the vision.
Oh man, it is very funny.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll say about this is that it is kind of ridiculous, and it is very
it's so ridiculous.
Yeah,
and there's room, I think, to like really lean into how disturbingly, I guess, ridiculous it is. And one of the things I found interesting about this in comparison, since it so blatantly was greenlit in the wake of, is how like unexciting in comparison to the window it tries to be, where in that film you had like a Hitchcock cinematographer like doing a series of crazy set pieces, like doing these low angle shots, doing these really shadowy, dangerous, twists of like suspenseful, dramatic irony of the kid having all this information the parents don't have. And and doing this whole thing the entire time where like, every adult in his community is just resisting or dismissing his cries. Like I think about that scene where the murderous couple kidnap the boy and take him in like the taxi cab, and the taxi cab driver's just like, I believe that this kid is your kid just because you say that, even though the kid is like screaming and crying saying these aren't my parents, they're trying to kill me. Like
the image when he has the conversation and he's in the taxi cab and he's also having a conversation with a cop that's outside the taxi cab, and I think the last thing he says is something like, "They're not my mom and dad," and you see just the cop waving and smiling like, "Oh, you silly boy, you." It's terrifying stuff, but it does give that kind of vibe. It's just this one, it has a little bit more. It's just sillier. It really is. Just because I think they're trying to break down all this like psychology, and she gets into this mental state where she won't even show emotion anymore. And they make it a point at the beginning to show that she's a very fun and loving child that makes a lot of jokes with her dad and all of that stuff. So, they're trying to break it down that way. And it's just, it's not quite as
I just found this.
Course.
Well, I was going to say, I just found this for how perverse it is as a premise, that here's a woman just thinking about murdering a child witness for most of the runtime. Yeah. It is just, it was surprisingly like kind of like low energy, considering that's the psychological perspective that we're in.
Yeah.
It's because like the scenes of talking to the kid and trying to coax this like information out of her just kill all momentum. And like something about like all of the like her attempts to kill the kid are so comical, and like the chocolate milk scene is unbelievable. Basically what happens is she is like, all right, I gotta kill this kid. I'm gonna pour all these pills. I'm gonna unload like 1,000 pills into this glass of chocolate milk and stir it around.
And the only tool the psychiatrists have to like hang out, like get on these children's wavelength, is to just give them all a giant glass of chocolate milk for some reason.
Yes. And the it's so funny because like first of all, she spills half of the like powder mixture from like the 30 cracked open like opiates that she just poured in there. She pours like a good portion of it onto the table next to the chocolate milk and then never has a chance to clean it up. And the little girl, she's like, all right, why don't you drink this chocolate milk and then we'll do something like do something fun. And then,
but only if you drink it all.
Yeah, she's like, it's all gotta be gone by the time I get back. And then
it's so funny how perverse of a sequence it is, but it's a flat scene of two kids being like, who's gonna drink this chocolate milk? There's a big glass of chocolate milk sitting right between us. They're doing like a stand-up bit about it.
Yeah. Who's on first about who's gonna drink the chocolate milk?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The boy coming in too, just like, give me your chocolate milk, just made me laugh too. There was something about his like just the boy.
He's like, I like chocolate milk. I drink my whole glass of chocolate milk. She's like, that's great.
And the really funny thing is that it seems like she doesn't even like chocolate milk at all, because like Nancy Reagan tries to give it to her earlier, and she's just like,
I don't want it. Yeah.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
So she's like, all right, I guess I gotta force myself.
And the sequence is diffused by the kids just accidentally knocking it over.
Just being incompetent, clumsy kids. Yeah, it's hilarious.
But that's just it. Like this is a scene
to thwart her plan. You know what I mean? Like,
this is a scene of a woman trying to poison a child to death, and it is like comedically flatly handled as just like, here is just she gives her the tension, I guess, is meant to be that we know there's poison in it, and it's like, which of these kids is going to drink it, and then they just knock it over. And that's what I mean by that. It weirdly doesn't have like a ton of like tension or pull to it, and just some of the way that it was made, despite the fact that like the premise absolutely is. Yeah, and that's such like a bizarre experience of watching it, where it is so much of just Dell, like, making little noises to distract from Susan's testimony, or like trying to undermine it in front of David's lawyer, or like taking a small boat ride to dispose of her clothes from that night. And I guess because I had Shadow of a Doubt kind of in my mind and The Window in my mind, which are from the perspective of the kids. And I think that this is a much scarier movie from Susan's perspective, if you were just like, and if she had like found out about it earlier, and she's just like, this woman can actually manipulate her way. Because what I love about Shadow of a Doubt is it's the murderer's uncle who comes to town, and the niece figures it out pretty early on, and she's the only one who knows what he is. And so much of that movie is like, the kids are learning of this adult betrayal, and it's incorporated into the set pieces of them actually being like, the adults can manipulate this world. They have more power than me in this world, and that's really scary. And and I was just really surprised that it feels like they set that up to happen with this little girl and the aunt's relationship, and they just never actually develop it. The whole time is just like the aunt being like, hopefully they don't get that information out of her, and hopefully she drinks this poison, or I drown her, in her little like water therapy bed that they strap her into. It's kind of creepy looking, actually.
Yeah, they put her in a straitjacket and then put her in a tub, and it's which is crazy. And she goes in
like
the best plan.
Memories are gonna pop out of there for sure.
Yeah, they're like, this is gonna activate your psychotronic receptors, and she's like, okay. And, then they like leave the room, and you don't see what Anne Southern does in there, but like, it's presumed that she just like sets up the girl to die, and then like sets the door to do not. Yeah. Like leaves, it puts the door knob on.
I do like the call the next morning when she's like, "Oh, hey, can I take Susan out today?" Expecting them to be like, "Ma'am, Susan died last night. She drowned in her sleep." And she's like, "No, Susan can't come out, but there was a little accident, but she's fine, and she's gonna tell us who killed the guy, by the way, soon." Or she's like,
she I think she remembers. Like, it's like, oh, cool.
The constant reminders of like, no, we're figuring it out. Don't worry. It is very funny to watch her just like constantly be undermined, whatever plan she has. And it does. I mean, in a way, it kind of makes sense to watch it, and it kind of digs. It works for comedy again this way. Is that she is such a normal character that has found herself in this circumstance that she would be pretty bad probably at doing these things and attempting them, but instead of turning it into this suspenseful very tension-filled thing that it probably should be for the most part, it can be more comedic than it probably intends. Even the part when she was poisoning the milk, I think, and this might have been just a thing from this time, I don't know, but I think she's using a container that just says like poison on it, and I found that to be cartoonish as well. Like that's like you said, straight out of a Looney Tunes thing. Like
that is Wile E. Coyote. That's what Wile E. Coyote would try to kill a little girl in the same way.
Poison with a little skull on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so Looney Tunes and ridiculous, and then like. But also then like the basically the finale of them being like, well, all right, I guess it's time to release her to her aunt. They like drop her off and
do we think that she's the killer? No. Let's release her.
No, it's fine. And then as they're pulling away,
she wants to take her to a remote cabin, by the way.
Yeah.
She's like, can I adopt her and take her to a remote cabin before she tells you who was the killer, by the way? And they're like, yeah, that's fine.
They're like, yeah, sure. And then like it's just literally a total coincidence of the light outside, a light outside the cabin projects the same shadow on the side of the wall. And the girl just screams, and it's
happens.
Like, yeah, it's like, damn. And they're like, huh, what's wrong? And Dell just like basically interrupts them and is like, I did it. I was the one that killed him, you see?
But she also just confesses for no reason. Like they were like, what, the little girl screamed and she pointed at you. But she's also like been in a fucking like, she's been deemed like kind of traumatized and not trustworthy, like her, like this isn't enough to work on her, but then she's like, yeah, I did it, I'm guilty,
it's like so out of character for someone who just tried to kill this child like 6 times. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too, of having her be like, I want to kill this child, but also I feel kind of bad about all this too.
Yeah, I feel like they could have had more scenes where she's actually struggling maybe with the decisions that she's making. It does more seem like she's just having reactions the entire time and just trying to get it done. There's not as much of an emotional struggle as there probably should be.
No, I mean, she's practically turned into a horror figure when she's drenched in like the hospital shadowy hallways, and she's like breaking her way in. She's like, no, I'm going to deliberately drown my niece to death, like
and then her being swallowed by the lawyers or the cops' shadow as she's like cowering or whatever. Very on the nose, but it's in the title. You got
the actual shadow work is it's fairly well done.
Yeah, I do like it.
It's classic striking noir shit.
It is funny when you say like she just outright confesses and doesn't necessarily have to, because it is.
She's right, Pike. I did it.
Yeah, and to think that like if she weren't to do that, really all the evidence they have is this. It's like the shadow looked like something the girl saw. Like that's basically what they have for a court. Yeah, and obviously as a film, the imagery works perfectly. I really do love that shot of like the stairs and then the big shadow over looming them and all of that. I think that's cool. But it is funny to think.
But it is funny that she also just turns the lights on while they're walking down the stairs. Like that's the only reason it illuminates her shadow is she turns it on. Like it's just as like, as ridiculous as like the lamp breaking in just the right moment to hit her and how big that shadow is formed at the top of the steps. And also that the shadow's there for a little bit before anyone notices it. And it's like the little girl screaming that causes it, which to me is the funniest thing that goes unaddressed, is that like it's pretty devastating to see that this girl relive this moment. And it's kind of like considered like a background, like, well, good thing it re-triggered her, and now her dad is, gonna be, not framed anymore for this murder he didn't commit. But I was like, man, do we not like think that we just like re-traumatize this child?
No, she's fixed. She's fixed.
Yeah.
You don't get it.
Her remembering it is now just she's able to move on somehow.
Yeah. What I'm saying is the better version of this is the version where they do the Twin Peaks thing, and it's like here's this little girl who just like sees this thing and she just starts like freaking out, and they go, oh, whoops, fuck.
Now we have a whole other problem to solve here.
Why did we want to get that memory out of her so bad?
The sequel is now trying to bring her back to a normal life.
Yes.
Also, it's funny to think that if she just didn't wear that damn feathered hat, she would have gotten away with it.
She would have had a more generic shadow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think really it's the hat. That was the big calling card.
I think that's like subconsciously she chose the hat because she's like, I need to be,
Yes, she wants to get caught.
Yes, she wants to get caught. Exactly.
She's guilt-ridden. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like if you ever asked a noir character to take their hat off before killing someone, come on, man.
Yeah, no.
That's
They got to be stylish while they do
that's the
cold-blooded
whole
murder.
point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
movie,
yeah,
though. I
and
still
it
liked
is.
it.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it too. We are being like a little, critical of it, but I think that's because its premise is such a different kind of movie than what it ends up being. But the movie it ends up being was a lot of fun to watch. Like the fact that it is like this weird like family psychiatry, like justice system melodrama with Nancy Reagan trying to like re-trigger the repressed traumatizing memory of a child in order to get her dad off death row. Like that's such a weird angle to approach this from when like everyone else would have done like the cat and mouse thriller between the aunt and the kid. Like that's such a more obvious perspective to take, which maybe you could say is a more boring perspective, but it's also like it's been done so well. And especially like it was done well in The Window. It was done well in Shadow of a Doubt, where it was like, I really did feel that even if they had just done both and they had actually done some more, introduced to the kid the fact that her aunt is trying to kill her earlier and actually see the manipulation that she's doing around her, because so much of what I love about Shadow of a Doubt is just seeing that uncle be like, I'm an adult and I have power and you have no autonomy, but you are trapped in a dangerous situation that everyone else perceives as normal and domestic. And that is what's so kind of perverse about that and tense about this premise. And it just feels like kind of a little bit of a missed opportunity that they don't quite go for that as well. But yeah, it is still like the actual shadowy murder sequence itself is quite well done. Mm-hmm. All of the visual and spatial like recreations of Nancy Reagan trying to pull it out of her are interesting. And all of the stuff with Anne Southern just being like the worst, most low rent Wile E. Coyote murderer is ridiculous and just a blast to watch, even though it is surprisingly low energy. It is like, what if I poured some poison into some chocolate milk and poof, she doesn't say anything anymore? It's like, that doesn't work. Then it's like, what if I just like strap her what if I undo her straps in her weird water bed? It's like, nope, that doesn't do it either. And the fact that she's at every turn, it's like something as ridiculous as like, her placing a phone call and being like, can a child actually accuse me of murder and I get in trouble? Or calling up the next day being like, oh man, I did such a great murder last night, and expecting Nancy Reagan to be like, wow, she got murdered last night. She's like, no, not only did she not get murdered, she's actually remembered. Everything.
Her slow realizations of her incompetence is really funny, honestly.
It's so funny.
The funniest thing about her remembering after that is that the insane like straitjacket water bath worked.
Yeah. So as a result, if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round, this one landed in kind of like the light 3 territory for me. I definitely had a good time with it. I always enjoy a good child endangerment thriller film, and there's a lot of ridiculous, fun little B noir melodrama elements to this. And also, I kind of agree with I kind of wish I went in and had Hesse's experience with it, where I was a little bit more shocked about the movie it became. But I think it does make that transition effectively, where it is like, this is just an adultery, drama that you've seen in like in the pre-code era or something like that. And then it's like, no, the one woman kills the other woman, and now the dad is on death row and the daughter is traumatized, and she's also a witness that we need to murder hilariously. It's such a ridiculous film.
They've already included too that the daughter's real mother died, and they say that in the beginning too. So you just watch like everything be taken away from this girl for like the first like 30 minutes.
Yeah, but so definitely had a good time with it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I would give it like a solid 3. There was never a moment where I didn't think I was gonna like it, but it was lighter than I thought it was gonna be, just given the premise. Once she started to kind of slow pacingly try to kill Susan, I was a little bit just taken back by how they were going about it. But
yeah, that it's not very dramatic. It's kind of silly.
yeah. But then I started getting a kick out of that too, and watching her like complete incompetence and her trying to figure out how to do this when she's really bad at it was something I got a lot out of, honestly. So, and I did think that everyone's performance was quite good, and really, Gigi, I think was Peru, the girl, was fantastic. I thought she was awesome. She had to go from like. She did that kind of, just happy, family-loving kind of almost comedy that she's doing at the beginning, and then has to do a lot of, horrifying scenes when she's discovering the death that's happening in front of her and stuff. I thought it was, it asked a lot of her for a child actor, and I thought she did a great job. But I think everyone does a good job in this. So, yeah, I'd recommend it for sure. I think it's fun.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, for you, Hesse.
I would give it 3.5 stars. I really like it.
Nice.
I love the Looney Tunes-ness of it, and going in blind was very fun. And I have a very fond memory of first watching this on like an edible on TCM and just being like, what the hell?
That feels like the ideal way of watching it. I think you had the best experience anyone could possibly had with it.
Yeah. And
like, what are these children talking about? Is someone gonna drink it?
It's pretty long too.
Like, are you kidding me? But yeah, I really love it. I love Ann Southern in it. I love the throat goat, Nancy Reagan, in it. She doesn't demonstrate her throat skills at any point, but it's okay.
Shame.
I think that it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely worth a watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for Shadow on the Wall here and this week's episode. That was The Sound of Fury from 1950 and Shadow on the Wall from 1950. Thanks so much, Hesse, for joining us and for bringing your TCM watching to our listeners. This felt like a good old TCM episode of the show, which we are going to be doing for the rest of the month, so everyone can look forward to that. But Hesse, this is usually where, if you've got anything to plug, we usually have you do that. So what's going on in Seeking Derangements and Movie Mindset world?
With Seeking Derangements, we have an episode on Patreon every week and an episode, a free episode every week. Subscribe to the Patreon and check out the beautiful podcast. That's how I make my money, basically. So if you want to support the Hesse mindset and the Hesse, and speaking of the Hesse mindset, the Chapo Trap House Movie Mindset podcast just finished our October Ghoul v Scream Set series, and we just concluded that, but we will be returning in March with more episodes, and make sure you listen to all the Ghoul v Scream Set episodes. I think we just did, the last episode was Wolfen and Candyman.
Nice.
Which is a
That's
very
right, but
fun...
I saw you guys were doing some Tom Atkins stuff, and actually on the same week we both dropped episodes on Roger Corman and Vincent Price, but we did different movies. We did House of Usher and Pit and the Pendulum, and I think you and Will did Mask of Red Death, and what was the other one you guys did?
We did Mask of the Red Death, and the other one wasn't Roger Corman, Vincent Price. It was The Last Man on Earth. Which is the same like short story as Omega Man, but it's a very fun one. But I love, if we were going to do another...
But that was still Vincent Price, right? Because I haven't seen that one, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
that's
gotcha.
Vincent Price. But if we were going to do another one, it would probably have been The Pit and the Pendulum, because I love that one so much.
The Pit and the Pendulum is awesome.
Yeah,
it's
great.
And also the other connection there is Last Man on Earth, because that's obviously the I Am Legend story. That's written by Richard Matheson, who was the guy who actually was doing all those scripts for Corman too. We talked about him on our episode because he's the sci-fi author who did like Duel and Incredible Shrinking Man, and he did the scripts for House of Usher and Pit and Pendulum as well.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he's great.
Richard Matheson, kind of the boy. He also wrote The Raven, which is like the most ridiculous one any of them did.
Oh yeah, the one with Peter Lorre as the Raven.
Yeah, where he's like half Raven, half like weird wizard man, and Vincent Price and Boris Karloff just like shoot lasers while sitting in chairs at each other. It's
Have you
hilarious.
seen the Cask of Amontillado, Vincent Price and Peter Lorre one?
I haven't actually.
Oh my god, it's so good. I think it's in Tales of Terror. It's but it's amazing.
Oh, gotcha.
It's
yeah,
like-
no, Peter Lorre, just a guy I like looking at. You know?
Yeah, no, him and Vincent Price having a contest to see who could get more hammered. And then Peter
Sold.
Lorre, that one is a real Looney Tunes, like real life Looney Tunes one, because it's two people that like actual Looney Tunes characters were based on going completely ham mode. Like there's a part where Vincent Price does the like stuttering thing. It's
Awesome. I love that.
It's so goofy and cartoony.
Hell yeah. Well, definitely go back and get caught up on all of the spooky Halloween mindset episodes that Will and Hesse were doing. They were fun.
Yes.
And for our listeners, we are going to be continuing on, though, leaving the spooky mindset in the rear view for just a little bit, where we are going to be committed to doing the rest of Noirvember, talking a bunch of noir films. Next week, we have a very special last-minute sub-in episode, because this is going to be a different episode, and I haven't told Jamie about this yet, which is why he didn't know at the top of the show like he usually does. I saw David Fincher's The Killer recently with Michael Fassbender.
Heck yeah.
And I had a really great time with it. It's coming out on Netflix very soon. And there was an old noir movie it reminded me a lot of called Murder by Contract from 1958. Which is also about a very ruthless and efficient contract killer, but specifically it's so much about like his narration and his philosophy on like the transactional nature of what he does, and his sort of rationalizing of it and everything. And it's a very, very great noir, and I hadn't seen someone recreate that and like as well as until this Fincher movie, where Michael Fassbender is a hitman who like uses like Postmates and WeWork, and it's very mundane, and he listens to the Smiths, and he treats it like just like a labor job, and has a philosophy about how it is just like this, he clocks in and does it the same way like you work like a warehouse gig. And Murder by Contract is the only other film I've seen really capture that, so I want to talk about that next week. And there's actually another great hitman noir from 1961 called Blast of Silence. So
cool.
That is going to be the pairing we're going to be talking about next week.
I've never seen either of those. Those sound cool.
Ooh, you should watch them. The Alan Barron Blast of Silence one too I think it's going to get reissued on Criterion this year, because the DVD has been the only thing in print for a long time, and I think it's finally getting a Blu-ray this year. So
the Murder by Contract poster is so funny. It's a guy garroting a woman, and on the top it says double rates for women, because a woman is always double trouble.
Well, that's one of the funniest things about the movie, is that he's very carefully plans his murders, and one of the main dramatic thrust of the movie is that they gave him all the correct information, but they didn't tell him it was a woman. So now it's become an unpredictable job, and he's like, you're breaking the fabric of my routine, motherfuckers, Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about next week over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with another special guest, where we are going to be doing an episode that we've kind of had planned for a little while. We're finally going to talk about one of my favorite noirs of all time, Kiss Me Deadly, from 1955,
Yes.
directed by Robert Aldridge, one of the Mickey Spillane sort of Mike Hammer adaptations, with one of my just favorite endings in any noir film. And we're going to be pairing it with, I think, a Japanese noir one that I haven't seen called The Man Who Stole the Sun. Which I have not seen, but in terms of the imagery of sun and light and the elements of Kiss Me Deadly with the sort of like nuclear briefcase ass shit, I think we're going to have some connective tissue there. And so you can expect to hear that with a guest in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed. And, we will go noir mode for the rest of the month. But
Kiss Me Deadly was another one that I asked if I could bring on, but you said someone already reserved it.
I know, and you know what? They had reserved it. Like the person who reserved it actually reserved it like a year and a half in advance. I was like, they were like, I want the noir episode and I want Kiss Me Deadly. I was like, well, okay, let's do it. So
I can't wait
long
for that
time in the planning. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.
Keep it sleazy.